Now, next is the quantitative risk assessment. I actually already did the quantitative risk assessment. I gave you that AWS example. That is exactly what is quantitative risk assessment. But I will still go ahead and explain. Right? First is you need to find out the asset value. Now, what is the asset value? I told you it is the purchase cost, value, okay, maintenance cost, everything added together gives you the some dollar value of a asset. Right? Say $100 million. So now you can quantifiably say that this application of mine, which is right now running, in which I carry out the Zoom classes, fetches me $100 million a year. What is the asset value? 100 million. Right? Then I try to find out what are the threats to this asset of mine. What are the threats? There could be a denial of service attack. There could be an application outage. Okay. There could be, there could be intended, takedowns. There could be server faults, right? There's so many things can happen which can affect the availability, confidentiality, and integrity of the, the application. Once you've done this threat analysis and you say you have 4 threats, right? You do asset threat pairing. You create an asset and threat pairing. So asset is, e-commerce app. And what are the threats? Threat 1, threat 2, threat 3, and threat 4. There might be hundreds of threats, right? But from where will you get these threats? You will get these threats from your threat modeling. So from threat modeling, you have prioritized your threat. Yesterday we saw, right? We prioritize our threats. Okay. So once that priority is there, I now give priority 1 here, P1 here, P2 here, P3 here, P4 here. So now I have done an asset threat prioritization. Okay. So now I get a list of asset and threat pairing. Okay. Now for each asset threat pairing, that is asset into T1, asset into T2, I try to find out what could be the exposure. How much, if this threat materializes, what would be the exposure? That exposure gives me a factor called exposure factor. Right? So that means that I had an asset value, I found out the threat, and then I try to find out what could be the exposure, which is given in exposure factor. Okay. Once the threat materializes, there is going to be a one-time loss. Okay. A denial of service attack took place for 2 hours. There was loss of $20 million. That loss was called as single loss expectancy. If a threat materializes, the amount of loss which is going to happen for each asset threat pairing is called a single loss expectancy. That means my app was 100 million, right? $100 million is the value of my asset. This is the asset value. Okay. The chances of a denial of service attack, okay, is 1 by 10. That is 0.1. Okay. So exposure factor is 0.1. And if the denial of service attack materializes, my losses are $20 million. That means single loss expectancy is equal to 20 million. Clear till now? Okay. Now, how many times this denial of service attacks takes place in a year? The rate at which it happens yearly. If it happens 3 times in a year, then my annual rate of occurrence is equal to 3 times. Therefore, my loss in a year would be ALE, that is annual loss expectancy, which is SLE, single loss expectancy, into ARO. Okay, that means I'm going to have a $60 million loss. Clear? Okay, that means if I don't implement any controls and denial of service attack takes place every year 3 times, my revenue loss will be $60 million. Okay. So now I will try to put controls which reduces this exposure in such a manner that the $60 million comes to my risk tolerance of $2 million. And I'll now research a control or a safeguard which reduces this denial of service attacks from 3 times in a year to a value wherein my loss is only equal to $2 million. Okay. And this is kind of assessment is called a cost benefit analysis. A very simple numerical. It's given in your Cybex. Please go through it. Something very simple. So basically, now the moment I've told you that my exposure factor was 0.1, I would like to reduce this exposure factor to 0.001. Now all you need to do is go reverse engineering, and you now need to put the ALE. Now you know that ALE is equal to 2 million. Earlier ALE was 60 million. Now you need ALE is equal to 2 million. That means you have to put a control which saves you $58 million. And what would be that cost of the control? Then you get into discussions and you find out the vendor, and you find out that control of a rate limiting firewall, a web application firewall, which costs you $2 million annually, okay, can reduce the risk from $60 million to $58 million. Excuse me. Okay. So now this is your assessment that the control, once you implement this control, now your losses are from 60 million to 58 million. What is the cost of the control actually? Cost of the control is residual risk, that is 2 million, plus cost of the control, which is 2 million. So 4 million. So this is the annual cost of safeguard. ACS is equal to $4 million. So by putting a $2 million, you have reduced the risk to $2 million and you have saved $58 million. But the annual cost of your control is $4 million. Am I clear? Simple maths. Right? Okay. Now, generally, once you have asset threat pairing 81, 82, 83, 84, and you get ALE, this ALE is 60 million, this ALE 1, okay, and for 82, this is 2 million, then for 83, ALE is 0.01 million, for ALE for 84 is, just 1K, 1000 USD. Now you can prioritize that this risk is P1, this is P2, this is P3, this is P4. Now you know which risk to address first, this risk to address first, because it is giving you the maximum revenue loss. Okay. Now, what is the response you are going to give to this risk? You will say, oh, let's mitigate this risk. I cannot handle this risk. Let's reduce it to $2 million. I'm ready to spend required budget to, and you research and you find out that a 2 million WAF will bring down this losses to your acceptable level. Okay. Then you say, okay, the second one is also substantial. I need to mitigate this risk, but it is being taken care of while I was handling risk 1. So the cost of control is 0 and I have mitigated this risk. Okay. You say this one is 0.01, not a very great risk. Let me transfer this risk because there is no control available. Okay. So there's no control available. I cannot, the risk was some particular risk which cannot be, you cannot get over it. Like road accident. You cannot say you will not meet a road accident. So what do? You buy risk. You transfer the risk to someone else. You buy insurance. Okay. This technique, what we are saying, is finally, once you prioritize the risk, this technique, what we are trying to do with the risk is called a risk response. Okay, so what are the risk responses? Risk responses are, you can take the risk and reduce it. How do you reduce risk? By applying safeguards. Right? You apply controls, you safeguard. Okay, you initially drove a Maruti 800. Okay. And then when you could afford a big SUV, you bought the SUV because now you want to reduce the risk further. You are more worried about your life. Okay. That time you were more worried about your money. Now you are more worried about your life and you have the money. So you reduce the risk by buying a better car, right? Then you say, okay, even though I bought a very good car, but still there are chances that, accidents might happen. Okay. The ex-CEO of Tata lost his life in a Mercedes. He was sitting behind. Princess Diana lost her life in sitting in a bulletproof vehicle. Okay. That means chances are still there that risk will materialize no matter how expensive the car. In that case, the residual risk, I put the safeguards, but there is still some residual risk. Either I accept it or I transfer it. I buy insurance, right? So once I bought a very beautiful car, a very tough car, but still there are chances of an accident, I go and buy a insurance, though it is regulatorily mandatory to buy insurance. Okay. You can also do risk deterrence. Okay. You put a warning sign that if you come inside, I'll shoot you. You're trying to tell the threat, I've got a very big control and I will utilize it. Okay. I will shoot you. You're trying to deter. You put a false dummy camera. The thief comes, looks at the camera and goes back. You have deterred the threat. Okay. You can also avoid a risk. How do you avoid risk? You don't take the path where the risk lies. Okay. If there are chances of getting flooded in near river areas, you don't go and build a house in the river areas. You're scared of floods, don't make a house in riverine areas, go and make a house in mountains. But then if you're scared of earthquakes, then you will say, oh, earthquakes are there in mountains a lot. I would rather go to plains. So what are you trying? You're trying to avoid. I'm scared of denial of service attack on my application. I don't launch the application because of I don't want to take the risk of a denial of service attack. I don't need a website. I can't handle a denial of service attack. Right? That is called risk avoidance. And then there is risk acceptance. You accept the risk. You say, okay, I know I have done my due diligence and this is the risk which I'm ready to accept because I know I'll be able to handle it. And finally, which you are not supposed to do ever, is called risk rejection. Risk rejection is when you say, okay, so what if the risk is there? What Paytm did? Paytm did risk rejection. It knew RBI is a very, very strict regulatory body, and still it did not comply to its requirement. It rejected the risks and it is out of business. Okay. So these are the responses of risk. These are the responses of risk. Okay. Great. So once you have, done this risk assessment, okay, then you will be able to tell that what kind of controls you need to implement. So now you know the risks, you know the priorities. Okay. Now you want to implement controls, implement safeguards. If you want to reduce the risk, mitigate the risk. Now, risk mitigation can be done in many types, in mainly three manners. First is a administrative control. Second is a technical or a logical control. And third is a physical control. Okay. Right? The threat will, the risk will lie in these three regions and you will control. So administrative controls are what? Procedural controls. You say there is a risk of COVID happening. There is a complete curfew. Nobody will come out of the house. Okay. You implement section 144 and nobody is allowed to come out of the house. Administrative control. You tell your employees that you will come only through gate number 1. No other gates will be used. All gates will be locked and monitored. Administrative control. You're forcing employees to come through one particular passage, right? Okay, you say that all employees will attend training mandatorily once in 15 days. Training portal can be accessed. This is your username and password. Okay, administrative control. Then there are certain risks which you cannot manage with administrative control. You have to employ technical controls or logical controls. Like in case of a network threat, you have to deploy a firewall. In case of an application threat, you have to deploy a web application firewall or endpoint detection and response systems, anti-malware systems. These are all logical or technical controls. And finally, there are physical controls. Physical controls are controls which assist, both the technical and the administrative controls, like putting physical locks, putting your switches and racks inside proper lockable racks. Okay, you have access control gates, and you have RFID batches. Okay, so these are physical controls. You are giving some identity and access management technique to avoid certain kind of physical risks. Okay, so these are the I will say basically the safeguards or the controls which you can implement, right? Now there are many various types of controls. Okay, now these are the categories of controls. Okay, now there are types of controls. These were so when you say category is broader. So there is administrative, there is physical, and there is technical. And there are types of controls. There is preventive controls, there is deterrent controls, there are detective controls, there are many, there are compensating controls, then there are corrective controls, recovery controls, and directive controls. Okay, what is each control do? Preventive controls. It prevents the threat from materializing. What is a deterrent control? It deters. Okay, it gives a signage that if you do this, there will be consequences. So you're deterring the threat to do something. Detective is if something happens, you should be able to detect. There should be some trail. You should be able to create a trail of the threat. Such kind of controls. Okay, CCTV. A CCTV is both a deterrent control and a detective control. Because deterrent, because threat might see it and turn back. Why detective? If the threat agent takes the vulnerability and exposes you, the CCTV is recording, and now it becomes a detective control. Okay, logging is a detective control. Compensating is you already have a control, but you still feel that this control may not be able to. There's a chances of increasing the strength of the control. Then you'll put a compensating control. What is a compensating control? You already have a wooden door, and still you put an iron door, right? Why? You know that wooden door anybody will kick and it will open. So you put an iron door and put a lock. You have compensated. You have increased the strength, right? You might also have a web server in front of which there is a web application firewall. Even if the web application firewall is not able to stop the denial of service attack, you have rate limited certain ports on your server so that even after the WAF is not able to rate limit, your ports, you have rate limited them. Okay, compensated for the additional control, right? Increasing the strength. Then you have corrective controls. Corrective controls are if one control fails, then the second control gets into action. Okay, at times you put you have a firewall, but still you deploy an IPS and an IDS system. Why? Firewalls can be bypassed. Firewalls work at network and transport layer. Next generation firewalls do deep packet inspection, but you do a corrective action by saying that in case the firewall fails, okay, then I still have another layer of controls. Such controls are called corrective controls. Then there are recovery controls. So recovery controls are controls which will help you recover from a catastrophic failure, right? Backups are recovery controls, right? Then you have something called directive controls. Directive controls are mandatory controls. Mandatory controls means you have to follow this path. Okay. Directive control is something like you have to come through gate number 1. Okay. You will not get an access unless you put your username, password, and your RFID card. Directive control. It is directing you to do something which you have to do. Otherwise, you will not get the access. Okay. Any doubts till now? We're about to, finish the risk assessment part. Right.
Detective and deterrent, can you just explain what's
detective controls are okay. The threat is there. Okay. It took a vulnerability and exposed you, right? Okay. Now, it will leave certain trails, right? It will take some path to here. It will expose this vulnerability. There will be some trail will be there, okay? Is someone measuring this? Is someone measuring this activity? If a control is measuring this activity, it is called a detective control. In the physical domain, a CCTV is a is a detective control. Why? It is detecting your threats. What happens in the technical controls? Logging. Why do you do logging? To detect, isn't it? You want to know which IP, what was the call, okay? What was the response? What was the header? Okay, what
This
was the time?
IDS, can we take IDS as a detective?
Yeah, IDS is a detective control.
Yes. Yes.
Right? Logging is a detective control. IDS is a detective control. IPS is a preventive control. Right? Generally, IDS, IPS are nowadays the software blades inside the firewall only, right? So,
SIM tool is a detective control.
which one?
SIM tool, SIEM.
SIEM is a logging technique, right? It's just a dashboard of logs, right?
It's a monitoring, right? Same as a
It's
monitoring.
monitor, but it's
Yeah, but
getting
you're ingesting all the logs. So what can you monitor? You monitor why? To detect something, right?
right.
Why are you monitoring it? So CCTV, if it is just put and nobody is monitoring that screen, what's the use?
Yeah, so security guard is the monitoring and the detective. Yes.
Yeah. So the TV becomes the SIEM for the, the security industry is running on jargons. Okay. And all these fancy words are created by the big players to market their products. Ultimately, otherwise, security is a simple thing. Right. So you detect, right? And then you said deterrent. Deterrent is a control which can deter you from taking this path. Okay. Two ways. Either you make this path very difficult so that I give up. Okay. I ask you tomorrow, if you go for a 10-kilometer run, you will get married to the next Miss Universe. Okay. You say, I will, 10 kilometers is nothing. And once you go, you see that the 10 kilometers is not straight, it is upwards 10 kilometers. Right? So I have made a deterrent control. Okay. I deterred you to, get married to the Miss Universe. Why? Because I made the path very difficult. Second way is I have given some visual indication that if you take this path, you are breaking the legality and I will shoot you. So you try to come here, I log your IP, and then I go to court and I sue you. Okay. Whichever hacker you were. Private property, I've kept a board. If you cross this line, you're liable to get shot. Deterrent. You're trying to cause a fear inside the mind of the threat agent. Got it? Now, a single control can be a deterrent control, can be a preventive control, can be a detective control, depending upon the circumstances. Right? Got it? A lock might be a preventive control if somebody is trying to break it. If the thief comes and sees a big lock and knows that he cannot break it, for him it is a deterrent. That there is a lock, I don't want to get in. Now, how do you compensate your security? There's a door, there's a lock, and you put a small CCTV camera here. It is compensated, this control, by adding a factor of deterrence. So it is a compensatory control. At times, it's compensating for whatever weakness your original control had. That's a compensating control. Right? Clear? Shall we move ahead?
Yes.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe our channel.